Everyone, as I've just said, I'm Alex. We'll make a bit of a start now. So this afternoon we're going to discuss the level 2 Lean Manufacturing Operative Standard and Endpoint Assessment. The session will be recorded, so we can't put this out to you afterwards. That's absolutely fine. Can I just check that everybody can, she says, if you could just put in the comments in the chat box, can everyone hear me okay? Great, thank you very much for the feedback, Darren. If at a point any at all, just give us a shout via the chat. I've allocated some time at the end to ask questions. Hello again, Andrea, you all right? Great stuff. I've allocated some time at the end to answer some questions that you've got. But if you do want to ask questions as we're going through, please feel free to put them in the chat, and then I'll address those questions sort of as a priority when it comes to the end section. Okay. As I've said, we are recording this session, so you will get a copy of that recording, so you can look back at it sort of at a later date and digest anything that's in there. Okay. It shouldn't take 2 hours this afternoon. We're probably looking at about 40, 50 minutes, something like that. And then again, with some questions. All right. So we'll make a bit of a start then. As I've said, we've got the Lean Manufacturing Operative Standard. Just a bit of an overview of what the session's going to look like. So it's an introduction to who SIAS are and what SIAS do. So Andrea, I know you've sat through this before, so you know exactly who we are now, but I've noticed there's a couple of new names in here as well. So it's just an introduction, I suppose, from me to you to let me know, let you know a little bit more about our business. Then we'll talk about the Lean Manufacturing Operative Standard, so what it looks like, how it's set out. We'll think about how we track the apprenticeship against the standard specifically, how we think about preparing for endpoint assessment, the technical expert's involvement in the endpoint assessment. So remember, the technical expert for this standard is someone from the employer, so it is an employer nominated person. And then, as I've said, we've got a space for questions at the end. If you do want to ask them as we're going through, however, please put them in the chat box, and as I've said, I will address those sort of first thing at the end. All right. So we are the Science Industry Assessment Service, and we were set up in response to obviously the changeover from the frameworks to the standards, and science was some of the first frameworks to switch off, and therefore we were set up to sort of service the science standards coming through. Since then, obviously, we've grown quite a bit, and now we're moving more into the engineering sector, but we do specialise in endpoint assessment for roles within R&D, production and manufacturing, engineering and analytical services, right across the manufacturing, science and health sectors. Okay, so what is it we do then? That's who we service. Well, we design all of the assessment tests and we deliver them in line with the Institute for Apprenticeships and the assessment plans that have been published on there. We make sure that all of our assessment methods are quality assured, so we do have a moderation process. We register and train all of our independent assessors that would come onto your site to facilitate all of the endpoint assessments, and we are the people who will claim the apprenticeship certificates as well. All right, so we do that. Obviously, it used to sit with the provider, didn't it? But we do that now on the provider's behalf. So by the time your apprentice and yourself, as the provider or indeed the employer, receive written communication to say that your apprentice has passed, we will have applied for that apprenticeship certificate. Okay. So the things that we do then, as I've said, we were set up predominantly in response to the science standards, but actually we've grown quite a bit now when we're moving more into the engineering sector. So we've got a raft of the level 2 ones there. So we've got the Science Manufacturing Process Operative, the Engineering Operative, which I know some of you are familiar with, and the Lean Manufacturing Operative as well. Okay. Moving through, we've got the level 3 standards. So we've got the Science Manufacturing Technicians, the Lab Techs, Science Industry Maintenance, and the Maintenance and Engineering Operations Technician standards as well. And then also we do the higher level as well. So we've got the Technician Scientist that has taken, that covers, I suppose, the retired original lab scientist role. We've got the new lab scientist level 6 program. We've got the Science Industry Process Plant Engineer, which is a level 6 degree apprenticeship. And we've also got the research scientist as well at level 7. So as I've said, our growth area is very much into the engineering standards. So then let's think about the level 2, the Lean Manufacturing Operative. What does it look like? You know, how do we deliver it? What's a training plan, all of that kind of thing. So this is thinking about carrying out manufacturing activities on multiple products with different specifications consecutively. A level 2 standard with a 6K funding band on there. The assessment plan says there should be a minimum of 12 months as an average training period, and your endpoint assessment will follow that, all right? So it is not 12 months with your EPA period incorporated in there. It is 12 months plus your 3. Okay, so you've got the following 12 weeks after your training period's finished to go through the endpoint assessment. Obviously, there's a set of core knowledge, skills, and behaviours, but then we do have specialist job roles that tag onto that as well. Okay, so your apprentice will be expected to have understanding of the core knowledge, skills, and behaviours, as well as the knowledge, skills, behaviours associated with one of either production or assembly, inspection or quality, logistics and material handling, or indeed production or and process finishing. Okay, so those are the 4 job roles that we'd have our lean manufacturing operatives do. What are the gateway requirements then? Well, actually, we've got the mandated qual this time. So we are looking for the level 2 diploma in manufacturing knowledge and skills there. We need to make sure that our apprentices have achieved a level 1 functional skills in English and maths, and they might have sat their tests, well, they need to have sat their tests for level 2. Equally, your apprentices might come in with level 2 quals, and that is absolutely fine as long as we see sight of those. We are looking for an evidence portfolio as well. This is a gateway requirement, so we must see it at gateway. It must be completed by that point. And then a vocational competency log. And as the presentation goes through, I will sort of give you an overview of what that looks like. But ultimately, this is the sign-off from the employer to say, yes, my apprentice is ready for endpoint assessment. Okay, because remember, it is the responsibility of the employer to say that, to sign that off. All right. If we think about the endpoint assessment then and the methods of assessment, well, we've got 2 discrete assessment methods there. We've got the observation with the Q&A, and we've also got the professional discussion. Your observation, or the apprentice's observation with Q&A, can only be a pass or a fail. This is not a graded, or there's no higher grading available with this. However, the professional discussion, it can be a pass or a fail or a distinction. So if your apprentices are looking for the distinctive overall grade, that's where they should be looking to achieve the distinction in that professional discussion. All right. There is no hard and fast rules about the order of which these assessment methods take place. We have decided that we would go observation and then a discussion, but actually if the employer wants to go the other way around, that is absolutely fine as well. We can accommodate that. So then if we pick up the practical observation, well, what is it? We've got a Q&A there, that's tagged on the end as well. But remember, the practical observation is there to validate the apprentice's competency by observing them carrying out their job role, and it's in line with the assessment plans and the knowledge, skills and behaviours outlined there. We're looking for an activity or activities that lasts about 2 hours. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be, 2 hours. We'll start the clock at 10 and finish it at 12. This could be over the course of a day, actually, and it would be broken down into discrete sections. We are looking for this to take place in a realistic work and situation under normal conditions. We can use almost like a training centre, but it does have to be familiar and realistic to the apprentice. Ideally, it will be their workplace. As I said right at the top there, the apprentices are going to be assessed against their core and their chosen specific job role as well. All right, so they must cover the core there, and then they must cover one of the 4 roles. Can be made up of any number of tasks, but we are looking to make sure that those tasks will cover an end-to-end process, so right from the start right the way through. All right. It is followed up by 5 questions at the end of the observation. These are not peppered throughout. These will come at the end. And what this will address is any of the knowledge that hasn't been picked up during an observation. So as an apprentice is going through that observation, we would always ask that if they can provide a bit of a commentary over what it is that they are doing. Sometimes it's feasible and that's great. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's really noisy. Equally, that's okay as well. But that commentary that the apprentice provides, that will allow the sort of questions to be a bit more targeted towards the end. Those questions, again, don't need to clarify the apprentice understands what they're doing, so they will always be related to that knowledge criteria. Okay. This is supported by an employer-nominated technical expert. Now, this technical expert, again, comes up for the discussion, and it's something towards the end of the PowerPoint that we're going to look at and say, okay, then who should this technical expert be? What do they need to do? All right. As we said before, there's no hard and fast rules about doing the practical observation first and then the discussion, but that's the way we would set it up as an endpoint assessment organisation, unless the employer wants to look at it a slightly different way. Okay. As I've said, this would be followed then by the professional discussion, and this is now thinking about, okay, then, well, how much does the apprentice understand the requirements of their role as defined by the apprenticeship standard, and maybe he's looking at things that didn't come up during that observation. All right. So we've got a discussion that lasts around 40 minutes. And this is based on a portfolio of evidence. Now, as we said again, right at the top, this needs to be submitted at Gateway. Now, depending on how you are putting your portfolio of evidence together will depend on how you submit it to us. So I know a lot of people are using e-portfolio systems, and you might have a one-file account or a smart assessing account. What we would ask for at Gateway is to say, well, actually, could you set us up as an observer, so that the same way you would set up your EV, for example, for NVQs, so that we could have some observational rights to have a look at that portfolio of evidence. Equally, if you are operating paper-based, SIAS now have a system, a SharePoint portal. So all we would say is if you have a paper-based portfolio, we would ask you to scan it in and upload it to your portal. Now you get access to the SIAS portal once you have been through induction and registration of your apprentices. Okay, so what we'd be able to do from there is be able to see the evidence is uploaded, and then our the SIAS Assurer, whoever's going to be facilitating, can have a look through that portfolio of evidence. The next slide will talk about a little bit what that portfolio is going to look like. Okay, the discussion is chaired by the SIAS Assurer, but we also ask the technical expert from the employer to be a part of that. Now, the technical expert is there in a local expert capacity. All right, they can't sort of encourage the apprentice any further. They can't give the apprentice any guidance. But what they could do is, if the SIAS Assurer might ask them a question along the lines of, you know, is this right what your apprentice is saying, in line with your policy and procedure, and they can give that judgment. Okay, so that is why the technical expert now is allowed into this professional discussion. So as I said, they can't guide the apprentice, they can't give the apprentice any, you know, expand on any points and go, oh, remember what you did last week or 2 weeks ago or 3 months ago, you know, all that kind of thing. You've got something in that portfolio that you should be referring to. Nothing like that. It's very much in an expert capacity. Okay, so the SIAS Assurer will speak to them directly and say, you know, is this right in line with your organisational practices or procedures or whatever. There is a minimum of 10 questions, all right? And it says that, so that will cover the core and then one of the 4 specialist job roles again. So if you are, the mandatory question areas are all around health, safety, and environmental legislation and regulation and continuous improvement. Now, remember, this is where your apprentices will be able to get either the pass or the distinction. So if they're going for distinction, they should be looking at achieving distinction out of the discussion. Just to give you a sort of bit of a broad strokes on what that looks like then. Well, your pass would be your apprentice can describe thoroughly. So let's just take, for example, the health, safety, environmental legislations and regulations that are pertinent to them and their environment. But the distinction would look like they are able to explain it. All right. And that is, as I've said, broad strokes, but by and large the same for all the criteria that are coming down there to be assessed. So describe, that's getting you the apprentice the pass, and if they're able to explain, that's now coming into the distinction territory there. All right, and obviously there is still it's the core knowledge, skills and behaviours, and then one of the 4 job roles that comes into that. As I've said, a minimum of 10 questions. You've got your mandatory questions there. There will definitely be 10 questions that are asked. The bulk of those questions, as I've said, will be around the mandatory question areas. You're probably thinking of about a further 4-ish that will hit onto the specialist job roles. Okay, some of the job roles have got slightly more criteria to look at than others, but you're looking at about circa 4 questions there. So then you've got at least 6 thinking about the health, safety, environmental legislation and continuous improvement. Okay, if we think about this portfolio of evidence then, so it must be signed off by the employer. The same way that the employer needs to say, yes, my apprentice is ready for endpoint assessment, the employer must say that, yes, this is put together by the apprentice and this is their portfolio of evidence ready for their professional discussion. As I've said, it must be submitted to us at Gateway, and it is reviewed by the SIAS Assurer that would come on the site to facilitate the practical observation and indeed the discussion. And as I've said, we would look at accessing online portfolios, so e-portfolios, and indeed would give you access to the SharePoint system in order to upload a paper-based portfolio. This informs the professional discussion. So the 10 questions that we've just spoken about that the SIAS Assurer is going to ask your apprentice, this will allow them to sort of start putting those questions together. The portfolio, however, is not marked. It is only the verbal response from your apprentices. Okay, So it will inform the professional discussion. The SIAS assurer is going to look at it and then put together some questions based on the evidence within that portfolio. Those questions are still going to be the questions that I've just alluded to previously, but that portfolio isn't marked. Now, we're thinking about typically having about 5 pieces of evidence here. Okay, so if you're thinking about 5 pieces of evidence, obviously we are looking for qualitative pieces of evidence rather than quantitative ones. They should be matching more than one of the knowledge, skills and behaviours there. All right. Things that could be included. Well, first of all, we can't have any sort of self-assessment in there, self-appraisal, or indeed an employer's judgment on an apprentice. Oh yes, they are great apprentices, been smashing, work really hard, they're on time. Nothing like that. Okay, it should be fairly factual in what we've got here. The pieces of evidence should allow the apprentice to be able to talk. Okay, so for example, workplace documentation and records, job cards, job sheets, equipment checks, maintenance, service records, all of that kind of thing. We can use annotated photographs, CPD records, you might have SOPs, risk assessments, anything like that. But what they should do is allow the apprentice to talk around that. Okay. Apologies, that was my phone ringing in the background, my house phone. So that, yeah, there must be pieces of evidence that your apprentice can talk around. Okay, and as I've said, the pictures, sometimes the pictures will allow the apprentice to demonstrate, again, more than one of the knowledge, skills and behaviours there, but we're looking for about 5. Again, might be slightly more, might be slightly less, but about 5, that would be great. Observation, that's what I was going to say as well. We can have observations in there as long as they are like a witness testimony. Okay, so again, not along the lines of, yes, my apprentice is great, they do wonderful work, they're on time and all of that kind of thing. So that portfolio of evidence should come into us at Gateway. All right. Now then, we're going to start thinking about tracking the apprenticeship. So we've thought about, well, actually, what we're looking at, what we're being assessed on at Gateway. What we're being assessed on during endpoint assessment. What do we need to get a Gateway? But actually, what do we do on the run up to that? How do we know that we're making the right movement against the standard? So we need to make sure that the apprentice is progressing, or rather you do as the provider and indeed the employer. So actually, as the provider, you might go on to site and say, well, actually, come on, leaps and bounds that. I can see in terms of the occupation and the job role that the learner is progressing. You might have done observations, witness testimonies, apprentice might have done some reflective accounts there, and actually by the standard of the work and what it is they're writing, it's looking a lot better. I've got Q&As, we have job reports in there. Obviously, we've got the tech cert, so we've got that diploma in manufacturing that covers the knowledge and the skills. There might have been some additional quals in there, some workplace training. So your apprentices might have done, I don't know, they might have done some IOSH training, they might have done some something to do with quality, they might have done any kind of internal workplace, apologies, internal workplace training. So again, that might say, well, actually, they're becoming a bit more competent. And they're going to start developing this this portfolio of evidence as well, all right? What we would say, however, is that all the development, the training, the teaching, the learning, it should be tracked against the standard, because ultimately, on the day of endpoint assessment, we are coming in to say, has that apprentice met the apprenticeship standard as defined by that assessment plan? Have they achieved that or have they not? Now, what we do to facilitate that is on registration to SIAS, we will issue you, normally the provider, but it can go to the employer, on behalf of your apprentices, a SIAS Competency Evaluation Log, which is mandatory in the sign-off from the employer, and indeed a SIAS Competency Tracker. Now, the tracker is very much a work in progress document. So this will allow you, as the provider, the employer, or indeed the apprentice, to track your progress directly against the standard. And I've got a screen grab to show you in a second. And then obviously we've got the Competency Evaluation Log. Now, this is mandatory. We require sight of this at the end, or rather at Gateway, because what we're saying is, this is the employer's now sign off to say, yes, my apprentice is ready for endpoint assessment. Okay. Now, this screen that I've got here is taken from the Competency Evaluation Log. So this is the one that we require sight of sort of at Gateway and at the end. And this is the employer's sign off to say, yes, my apprentice is ready. All that training has taken place. Now, you will see down the side there, we have got all the knowledge statements. You would go through, you get the skills and the behaviour statements as well. And then we've got the evidence record. So this would just be a signpost. Where is the evidence to say that your apprentice has got an understanding of relevant statutory, organisational, health and safety regs? Okay. And it might be that you've got one file accounts for them and therefore your evidence record would be on one file. Or it might be that actually you've got a paper-based portfolio and it's called your apprenticeship portfolio and therefore you're right in there, it's going to be the apprenticeship portfolio. This should be someone from the employer, and as I've said, because there's a sort of there's a reliance on the employer as a technical expert to be a part of the endpoint assessment, we would suggest it's going to be the same person. All right, so that technical expert should be signing off this cell to say that their apprentice is ready for endpoint. They are not signing to say that the technical expert themselves have delivered all of that training. They've delivered it all to the apprentice. That's not likely to have been the case. The bulk of that will have probably happened from the employer, but again, and the provider in there as well. The technical expert is signing to say the training has taken place, their apprentice is safe and competent, they are ready for endpoint. Okay, so this should be very much signed at the end. What the tracking document does, which is this screen here, allows indeed any of the three parties, the apprentice, the provider, or the employer, to complete this along the way. So if we think about completing the cell, this page here, at the end to say, yeah, my apprentice is ready, they are good to go for endpoint. This document would help you complete and track the progress of assessment. So we've got the provider and the employer. Well, who needs to do what? When do we do it? What does it look like? What I've got here is these are just nominal timeframes. Now, if you think about a 12-month program, that's sort of they're just for illustrative purposes. We can really sort of think about these right up close to the registration period or indeed a bit further down the way. But the first thing we're going to issue you beyond the cell and the tracker, which obviously you get on registration. But if we think sort of about 6-ish months before the end date, we would issue an endpoint assessment preparing pack. Now, within that pack, we are thinking about the 2 assessment methods. So it'll talk to you a little bit about the tasks that you might want your apprentices to do, equally compiling the portfolio of evidence, indeed for the professional discussion, the kinds of questions we're going to ask during the professional discussion. Remember, just as a slight aside here, when we are talking about professional discussion, we want the apprentice to be able to relate it back to their practice. So it shouldn't be necessarily a theoretical understanding. It should be, talk to me about a time when, give me an example of. So it should come back to the apprentice, what they do for their job. All right. So we'll talk about things like that. Like I say, we'll give an example of questions in there with an answer in there. And as I've said, the tasks for the observation as well. So we can issue that we will issue it to you about, let's say, 6 months before the endpoint assessment. However, as I've said, these are very much illustrative timeframes. So if you come in right to us right at the beginning and said from registration, actually, can I have your guidance documentation? Because I want to do maybe bits of mock-ups and we'll maybe do bits of interim assessment and things like that. And we're going to base it a little bit on like what the endpoint looks like. We can absolutely provide you with that in order to facilitate things like that. That's absolutely fine. Okay. Again, sort of before 4 months before the endpoint, SIAS will run the technical expert induction training. So remember, this is the employer person. And again, a couple of slides time, I'm going to talk to you about, who that person should be. And then we're going to start thinking about commencing the EPA scheduling process. Now, when it's 3 months before the end date, if you're on your apprentices are on a 12-month program, the likelihood is they won't have completed their diploma yet. All we would say at this point is, are your apprentices, are they on track to complete their diploma? Okay. And with that in mind, we can start putting plans in place. If you come back and say, yeah, they are actually 2 months spot on. Obviously, we do need some evidence of that. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a certificate or certification, but we would be looking for something from AEL or whoever your exam board is to say, yes, this apprentice Joe Bloggs has achieved. Okay. I've just talked about that preparing for EPA pack, but just so you have a full understanding, the things we will do is provide guidance for completing the practical observation, which will include kinds of tasks and the specification that we're going to mark against for the observation, and also preparing for the professional discussion. So again, putting that portfolio of evidence together, what kinds of things should be in it, the kinds of questions that we're going to be asking, maybe it's an example question there with example answers of what that response would look like, or areas of the response that we're particularly interested in. Okay, so we have got that information there for you. It's worth pointing out as well, we will issue this to the employer and the provider. The apprentice can see it. There is nothing that would give them an unfair advantage. Everything we generate and we share with you can be shared with the apprentice as well. Okay. Again, about sort of 3 months out, we're probably thinking a little bit more like one to 3 months out. We're looking to confirm that endpoint assessment date. So remember, we must have that gateway evidence there. We can't put an apprentice through unless we have the gateway evidence. So we are going to request it. It does say 2 months here, but we're probably looking at a slightly shorter time frame than that. So again, we do need some evidence to say that the apprentice has completed that diploma, okay, that they have done either their functional skills and they've sat their tests, or indeed they've got the GCSEs or they've done functional skills previously. All right. So we do need to see all of that evidenced before the apprentice can go through endpoint assessment. Equally, at that gateway, we do need to see the portfolio of evidence as well. So please just bear that in mind. We're going to look to approve that gateway evidence, and then we're going to put confirm those dates. Yes, actually, you might come to us and say, well, we're looking for endpoint assessment within 6 weeks. Our apprentices just went through. We should be getting something from the exam board or whoever shortly to say our apprentices have passed. All right. The technical expert then and the endpoint assessment. So this is a person from the employer. So obviously we're going to issue the guidance that can go to both the provider and the employer. And again, that can be as soon as you request it. By and large, it's normally the provider that asks for it first, purely because they'll try and set up sort of interim assessments and do bits of mocks, normally embed them sort of throughout the program. And it might be that actually you do a bit of a professional discussion. It might be 6 months or whatever, and you'll only sort of look at the criteria that the learners have sort of touched on over that 6 month period, but it's just to get them in that frame of mind. Okay, this is now very much with the employer now, this part. Okay, so who should this technical expert be? Well, they are nominated by the employer, and they do need to give us a bit of evidence, complete an application form with us. So an application form is just to say who's their employer, who are they, what standard is their apprentices on, and what is their most recent CPD basic, or what is their job role. We need to have some evidence to say that that technical expert is competent in the occupation that is being assessed. All right. We are thinking about this in terms of someone sitting in on this practical discussion and having a planning and a practical observation for the apprentice to do. So what we're trying to say by this, or what the guidance is for this, is that it can't really be someone from HR or L&D. It needs to be someone that's occupationally competent to go, right, this is the task that I've planned in, and this is how it's going to hit the criteria and allow my apprentices to demonstrate that they have got competency in these areas. Okay. We do ask that these technical experts hold a qualification at the same level or higher than that of the standard. And it might be that actually they've just worked there for 10, 15, 20 years. That's absolutely fine as well. They mightn't have any qualifications. All we'd say then is, can we have a letter from the employer confirming their competence? So it could be from their direct line manager, supervisor, floor manager, whoever it is, just to say, yes, this person is occupationally competent, been doing this job for X amount of time, therefore they can facilitate the apprentice's endpoint assessment. Okay, so we do want that person to have the experience of current working practices, because ultimately, if we're wanting them to sit in on the professional discussion and planning that observation, they can't do that unless they've done the job themselves and have experience of that. Okay. We do ask them to go through a SIAS induction. Once they've been through that induction, and the induction will cover what do they need to do. I can only apologise for this, because can everyone still hear me okay?
I can still hear you, Alex. Okay.
Great, thank you. Keep us right, because it keeps telling us my internet connection's unstable, and I'm not sure why, because there's only me in. We then go through the induction with them, and then it says we give them a registration number. So we'll give that employer a registration number. What that does is that just ties the employer to the apprentice, to the organisation, to the SIAS assurer. It means if they do go through this process again with us, let's say within the next 2 years, they wouldn't need to go through a full induction again. They've probably still got that knowledge there to sort of plan in for this endpoint assessment, as long as obviously nothing's changed in accordance with the assessment plan. All right. So then we move on and we think about, well, what is the role of this person? We've said they need to be occupationally competent. Well, what are they going to do? Why do they need to be occupationally competent? Again, as I said right at the top then, we're thinking about reviewing a gateway review before the assessment day. So remember, your portfolio of evidence must be signed by the employer. That competency evaluation log must also be signed by the employer. That is to say your apprentice is ready for endpoint. It would seem sensible to me that that person would also be the person that plans in the observation as well, okay? So the technical expert has got a bit of a planning to do and a little bit of a time requirement around this. We then look to that technical expert to plan in the practical observation, and they might do that in conjunction with the provider or indeed with the apprentice, help prepare that apprentice for the observation as well as the provider. We want them to liaise with us about the content of whatever it is that they've planned in, and we will have specific timeframes that we work to for that. So if you think, let's say, the actual endpoint assessment date is going to be what we are now, end of March, just say, we would say that middle of May, April, let's say that's going to be our assessment day. We would ask for that paperwork back by the end of this month. So we want the plan of the observation to come into us about 2 weeks before that endpoint assessment date. We want them to act as the host. All right, when we come onto site to do this endpoint assessment, we want them to host us. We also want them to take part in the observation and the discussion and provide that guidance on workplace policy and practice. So remember what I said right at the beginning, it's not that they can input on the apprentice's work or elaborate any points the apprentice has made. The SIAS assurer would just ask them to say, you know, is this right in accordance with your organisation, your policy and procedure? Is this what you do? Is this how you use SOP? All of that kind of thing. And then the technical expert can give that judgment, yes, we do, or no, we don't, all right? What we do then, so we do liaise with the employer, and this is via this technical expert. Remember who they're signing off the competency log, they're going to authenticate the apprentice's portfolio of evidence. But actually, we need them to plan in this practical observation as well, okay? We give them a little bit of advice during the induction to say that. So we'll say, right, this is the area that we're marking against. When we come onto site, we need to see your apprentices demonstrate competency in each of these areas. So remember, we've got the core knowledge, skills and behaviours there, and then we've got the job specific role there as well. So when this document comes out, there will be 4 variations of it, one to fit each job role. And like I say, we are looking, we'll provide this, we'll give the specification to say, this is what we're marking against. We need you to plan in task or tasks that will allow your apprentices to demonstrate that they can do all of those things, okay? That's what we mean by planning the activities so that they provide sufficient scope to cover the practical observation specification, okay? What that does is that gives both the employer and us as the endpoint assessment organisation a full picture as to how that assessment day is going to run, okay, from the SIAS assurer coming onto site right the way through both the practical observation and the discussion, okay. We want to be able to look at that plan and go, right, okay, then if we go onto site and we see the apprentice do that, there's enough there for that apprentice to pass. And if we don't think there is, we'll come back and say that as well. We think, actually, you're lacking a little bit here. Can you add a bit more detail in? Can you think, like, you know, what does the apprentice do with regards to continuous improvement? What is their experience of it within the workplace, for example? All right. So that's the kind of thing that we're going to liaise with the employer on. And as I've said, we ask the employer to sort of complete this about 2 weeks before the end assessment schedule. We do appreciate that things change sometimes. So we would say if it's within, you know, if something's changed within that time, please just update the paperwork and send it through to us. And equally, you know, if it is just a couple of days out, please give us a call. Just because you plan in as an employer a practical observation and then something happens, let's say, I don't know, one of the lines has went off, you're going to have to change it up a bit. Doesn't mean to say that we have to cancel it. Just let us know, give us a call, talk to us about it. Because again, all we're looking for as well is that, is there enough detail? If we come onto site and see this new observation you put together, is there enough there for that apprentice to pass? Okay. That there is just about the end. All I can do is apologise for the technical interruption in the middle. I noticed that we've got, I think,